Joshua is the Director of Outreach and Education at Firebrand Technologies. He's a stalwart member of the standards community, helping publishers around the world create better books, serves on multiple committees, working groups, and is a regular at publishing conferences.
So let's dig in. So it wouldn't be a tech conference, of course, if we didn't talk about metadata in some way, because without metadata, we would basically have a failing system. If you look back in the publishing history, it was when metadata became very powerful that things started changing, right? We suddenly moved to online, and now a publisher's like, oh no, what is that retailer doing with that stupid old book description that should not be there? I wrote a new one last week, why don't they have it, right? So metadata became really important, and how publishers manage it and how publishers deal with it and what they do with it made some big changes. So because it's so important and because it's imperative that publishers understand how and why it works, what it does, and where it goes, a clear understanding of that is really the beginning of your success. So that's what we're here for today, is to talk about how you can get better at managing your data. So the path that your metadata takes from you through the whole system is somewhat similar to the path of Salmon. And I know my analogy will break down here. Please do not, nail me on that too much. There are differences, I get that. But work with me. Let's see if we can make some connections here. So Salmon really need to get somewhere, right? They're headed toward their destination. However, along the path, there are obstacles. Those obstacles, some of them are natural. Some of them are like waterfalls that you just have to jump over. And if you're strong enough, your Salmon, your metadata can get over those obstacles and get out to where they need to go. Some of those obstacles, though, are man-made. They are created by other entities that have other goals and purposes in mind, and the Salmon have to find a way to get around that, or they get blockaded by it. Those other entities don't always keep in mind what the Salmon need to do, and so therefore, sometimes the Salmon can't make the path. In other cases, those entities actually build a way for the Salmon to get around, right? Anybody know what a fish ladder is? So I'm from the Northwest, so I have to talk about something interesting from the Northwest, right? So the Salmon can make it to their destination. They may take a little more time. It may take some extra effort, but they will actually make it to the end. And in some cases, there are the inevitable cases where the obstacle that is built by those entities, it's a little bit more. And the entities decide that the Salmon really needs to make a more circuitous route, which takes even more time and could delay the Salmon's passage as well. And then there are the obstacles that are not always natural, or, well, maybe they're natural, but, they have other plans. They're not as passive as, say, a waterfall would be. They're more troublesome. They want to tear up the Salmon. They want to do things with the Salmon that the Salmon doesn't necessarily want done to it. Now, I'm an American, so this is kind of how I imagine this working in the Canadian market. Let's see if I can get this to play.
At the river mouth, the bears catch only the tastiest, most tender salmon. Which is exactly what we at John West want. John West endure the worst to bring you the best.
So, of course, you guys are the guy in orange, right? You're going to go out there and beat up the bear and make sure your Salmon gets where it's going to go? Is that? Sorry. Come on, you got to laugh at my jokes. This isn't fun if you don't laugh at my jokes. All right. So, good, we're back. In the end, Salmon usually do get where they're going, right? There are obstacles in the path, but in the end, the Salmon do get there. And when they get there, they do what they need to do. However, the ability of the Salmon to get where it's going is determined by really how strong it is, and by how well it's being backed by those who are helping it along that path. Its ability to navigate depends a lot on what's supporting it, who's supporting it. Your metadata follows a path as well, and it has to avoid obstacles as it goes through that path, and it has to have the strength to withstand the pressures, and it needs your support to try to keep it from being superseded by something more powerful. So let's talk about that metadata path and see if we can make it easier for you to help it traverse that path. So what's at stake? Now, there is a lot at stake here. Oh, come on. There's a lot at stake here. Before we get too far, I want to share some numbers with you so you can understand really what's going on and what's at stake for you and your business regarding metadata in the marketplace. As you all know, metadata and publishing is a really tough business, right? How many of you have trouble with your metadata, right? It's a tough business, and publishing is a tough business. Publishers work for years and years to grow their list, and those same publishers can lose their shirts if they're, if they have some failures in a year, right? It can be pretty problematic. So Firebrand co-sponsored a Nielsen report that came out at the end of last year called The Importance of Metadata for Discovery and Sales. This is a follow-up to a UK report from Nielsen that is looking at the US market and looking at sales in the US market. Now, the report is not nearly as robust as I would have hoped it had been, but it has some interesting numbers, and here's some key details that Nielsen found in their research looking at books in the US over a year-long period. So the first is the 2.5 million different titles made sales in the study period. That's from July 2015 to June 2016. So in that year, 2.5 million titles had at least one sale recorded through Bowker in the books, in the sales numbers. Of that 2.5 million, only 100,000, 4% of those titles, made up 86% of the sales. So 4% of the books that actually had a sale actually made up the vast majority of total sales in that list. So now we're going to look at that 100,000, right? Of that 100,000 titles, what kind of numbers do we see? What kind of data do we see about the metadata for those titles? How does metadata affect the sales of these 100,000 titles? This is actually, I think, really important. You want your book in that 100,000, right? You want your book in that 86% of sales. So let's look at what they do. Titles in that 100,000 who had the most basic metadata information: ISBN, title, author, format, publication date, BISAC subject code, sales rights, cover image, contributor. That's it. Just the basics, not even talking about necessarily book description, not really talking about a whole bunch of other stuff, just a basic metadata. 75% higher sales if titles in that 100,000 had the book description, had this basic metadata. So without that basic metadata, book sales were much lower. For fiction, this was even more true, where average sales with that basic metadata were 170% higher. So you need to have that basic metadata when you send it out to your trading partners. They need to have it, it needs to be correct. Now let's talk about it a little bit more. So cover images, titles with cover images had 51% higher sales. If you don't have a cover image available in the market, it may be on the book, I'm hoping it's on the book. But if it's not in the marketplace and people can't see the cover, we do judge books by their covers. If you can't see a cover, you're not going to buy the book. 51% higher sales. The description, an author bio, and reviews, those three elements, you put those three elements together, titles with those three elements had 72% higher sales than those that didn't have all three. And that's basic. It's pretty straightforward. And then keywords also affected sales. 34% higher sales when titles had keywords in their metadata. Now, that's just having keywords. We're not talking about the quality of those keywords. We're not talking about what kind of keywords they are. We're just saying, did they have text in that ONIX field? Was there something there for retailers to go off of and for users, for consumers to get more information for? So the stakes are pretty high, right? You're competing with other publishers for a very small piece of the pie, 4%. 4% of all books with sales actually made it into that top 86% of sales. You're competing with a very small list. And besides the actual quality of the books you publish, the metadata that you put into the marketplace could be the determining factor in whether your book actually succeeds or whether it fails. So I'd like to tell you a tale of two books. I want to show you two different books that actually have some similarities and talk about the differences between their different metadata and maybe talk about a little bit about which one was better. So these are the two books. The book on the left was published on May 4th, 2016 by a small publishing company. It was written by a master's certified health education specialist with a master's degree in education. The book on the right was published on March 14th, 2017, so just last week, by an imprint of Simon & Schuster. It was written by a well-known TV medium with no professional training. You will notice that the books have the same name. The books also talk about the same topic. Now, while those topics are very similar, and the books are very similar, the similarities kind of stop there, especially when you look at the metadata. The older title contains only the most basic metadata on the major retail sites. If you go and look, it just has a description, doesn't have an author bio, there's no excerpt, there's no book reviews. Other information was not very clear. In some cases, it wasn't even for sale anymore on some retailers. It's just not being maintained, but it's been out for a year. The newer title, though, has all of those and more. The publisher's taken the time to add more metadata, put more information out there, and good information about that, and it shows. When you look at the sales, the rankings of the two books on Amazon, you'll see the first title's ranked around, 2 million, 5 million in the books category. Number 6,336 in the love and loss category. And the second book is number 6 in the books category on Amazon, and number 1 in death and grief, angels and spirit guides, and channeling. So, granted, these books are not exactly the same thing, but the metadata actually is different for these two titles. And I bet you if you go out and look at your titles in the marketplace and you look at comparable titles, you'll find differences between your titles and your competitors. And those differences could make the difference between you actually selling more books than your competitors and not. So that's why I'm talking to you today. Let's look at how you can make your metadata better. We'll start off with your internal workflow. So, the internal metadata workflow at some companies kind of looks like this. This is not an actual image of a real roadway. This is actually photoshopped, but it feels that way sometimes, doesn't it? Anybody ever driven in Dallas, Texas? No one knows really where the metadata is going internally, who's in charge of what's going to happen to it once it gets somewhere internally. This is often due to two major issues. First of all, not using the right tools that make the creation and distribution of metadata easier, and not having a solid understanding of how the metadata should be created and sent. And I think the second one is probably the most common. How many of you use some sort of metadata creation software? You've got some sort of software. Okay, maybe not. Let's keep talking about this. Let's talk about tools. So first of all, we've been doing this for a long time. Firebrand's been in the industry helping publishers maintain metadata for 30 years. And we've seen it all. Publishers of every size, of every type, managing their data in all different ways. Some publishers do nothing. They don't have a system in place. There's no standard way internally of maintaining data across the board in-house. I'm not talking about sending it out. I'm just talking about maintaining the data internally. Other publishers use Excel. How many of you use Excel to maintain your metadata? Okay. So Excel is actually very useful for a lot of things, but maintaining metadata can be very problematic. Some publishers use homebrew applications and systems. Usually those involve either Access or FileMaker. How many of you guys do that? Couple? Okay. And then others use professional software. How many of you use professional software of some kind? Okay. And the rest of you you go through Bookshare? I don't know. What do you do? Anybody do something different than these things? No? Nobody's willing to say anything? You're like, shh, let her answer. So these systems all have their pros and cons. And my goal is really to get you from the nothing category or the Excel category into some sort of structure. You need an internal structure in your publishing house, maintaining data consistently and ensuring that you have a flow internally that makes sense to everyone on the team. I always talk about these different systems because so many publishers are just not aware that there are more efficient methods that are available. So, ignorance is not always bliss. Sometimes you just don't know that things will actually make a difference. So let me give you an example of this. I was at a publishing conference just recently, and I heard a sales manager from a mid-sized publisher talking about how hard metadata is. And he went into a 15-minute discussion and demonstration of his metadata workflow. He had an Excel spreadsheet. This is not a small publisher, mind you. He had a spreadsheet that had about 150 columns. And in that spreadsheet, he was maintaining all of the titles for his book, all of the titles for his publishing company, copying rows consistently, copying cells here and there. He had formulas left and right. He was doing all of this work in Excel that really should be done in a database of some kind, but he was doing it manually as well. And then he talked about how when he wanted to send that data out to his trading partners, the first thing he had to do was make a copy of the Excel document, chop out the columns and rows that didn't matter for that one specific, change the names of some column. Like, he's going into all this manual work in Excel. It's just not efficient. And so my hope is that you and your publishing house will have an efficient workflow, that you'll let technology work for you, that you'll have systems in place that make sense for the data you're trying to send. So there's an app for that, right? There is an app for that. Whatever you're trying to do with metadata workflow, there are programs, there are applications that you can either build yourself or buy or engage in some way that will help you maintain that metadata. Automation is really the key to modern business. It's important for you to invest in those metadata pieces, that automation, so that your process can help you instead of hinder you. In addition to tools, adjusting your team's workflow to accommodate metadata creation will save you both time and money in the end, and this requires teamwork. It requires that everyone in the publishing house have a say in how things work. Most publishers leave metadata management in the domain of just one department. Sometimes it's just one person. Editorial sees it as their exclusive domain, or marketing doesn't want editorial to get their grubby little hands on it. Or that poor metadata manager who sits in the boiler room in the basement gets the little shreds of Excel spreadsheets in paper print form and has to retype them into some sort of system that hopefully will get sent out properly. Now, okay, so obviously this is just a little bit of a hyperbole. Editorial really does wash their hands. But it's the way some publishers handle this stuff. Getting everyone involved in the process, everyone involved in the creation of metadata, makes it easier to accumulate, makes it easier to manage, makes it more efficient, and makes it better. The quality of your data will increase when editorial and marketing and production and everyone else all have a say in it, all have the ability to talk to each other and engage each other. And remember, you're a team. How many of you, I won't make you raise your hands, but how many of you have this problem where different departments don't really talk to each other about things? Or they kind of say, you know, that's not our thing. You guys are handling that. We're not going to mess with it. But in reality, it's everybody's job. And just like every team member in your publishing house has a role in maintaining the vision and a role in maintaining the company culture, everyone also has a role in maintaining the metadata. Because without this one piece, without metadata, your company will fall apart. You will fail as a publisher if you cannot sell your books. And you cannot sell your books in the modern marketplace without good metadata. That's just the way it works. So, hopefully, building teamwork is the first thing. Even before you get a tool, even before you build a system, teamwork is primary. Because everyone needs to be bought in to whatever tool you decide to start using, whatever system you decide to start putting in place. So, I recommend that you create a map or a path for your metadata to travel internally. What do managing editors need to be doing? What about production? What about marketing? What about sales? What role does every department have in the creation and maintenance of your data? Because it's not just about a little bit of, marketing putting a little bit here or managing editor writing out the book description and then somebody sending it out to trading partners. There's more than that. Sales needs to be involved in this. What happens if your salespeople or your company that you have doing your sales notices trends? Do the trends that are happening in your book sales come back and affect your metadata? Do things that are happening in the marketplace come back and change what you're sending out to your trading partners? What if one of your competitors' books is doing really well? How do you know? And are you maintaining your data in a way that actually makes that comp title affect positively the sales of your title? It's all about the maintenance, but you have to have a path. So I recommend creating some sort of metadata path. Sit down with everybody, all the key stakeholders, and come up with a plan. And say, look, we've fought, and we always have these issues, and I disagree with you. That's fine. Whatever. Let's work together. Let's find a path. What part do you want to play in it? What part do I want to play in it? What part do you have to play in it? You know, everybody should have a path. The appropriate time is important as well. So the Book Industry Study Group recommends that your metadata should be sent out to trading partners 180 days. That's 6 months ahead of publication date. That's the basic metadata for your book. Title, author, if you have a description, that's great, preferably a cover image at that point, 6 months in advance. And for a lot of publishers, that's a little hard to do, because maybe you don't have a plan in place enough in advance to actually have that data in one place where you can send it out. But if you can get it out early, even if it's bare minimum, even if you just have the title of the book, the release date, you know, other basic information. You don't have a price, that's okay. You don't have to have the price 6 months in advance. But during the 6 months leading up to publication, continue to update that information. The more often you update your metadata, the better that quality of the metadata is, the more likely it is to get recognized by your retailers, by your trading partners, as important and as helpful. So take that extra time, go through that extra effort, put it out 6 months in advance, and tweak it. Now, if you have a working title, it might be best not to put your working title out. Wait until you have an actual title. If you don't have a price yet, that's okay. Put your idea price, your draft price, but make sure it gets changed as quickly as possible to the final pricing. All those things can be done early and done often. These internal processes can either make or break your metadata creation, and they can also make or break the sales of your books. So internal processes. Any questions about this part of it? Do my recommendations make sense? It's going to be hard to implement? Hope not. So let's talk about the external metadata workflow. So your internal metadata flow might be confusing or just hard sometimes, but the external metadata workflow can kind of seem like a competition. Who has it? Who's in charge? Why is it over there? What the heck is that person even doing on the field? What are you doing with my metadata? Why are you messing with it? Not your job. So like our salmon analogy at the beginning of the talk, when metadata leaves your hands, it often encounters a variety of obstacles. And those obstacles could be natural obstacles that metadata has to overcome, or they could be a bit more difficult to overcome. So let's talk about a real-world example of this. Let's say you're the publisher of a book by M. Night Shyamalan. Now, of course, no one knows how to spell the name Shyamalan, mostly because I think they added some extra letters. I don't know. Does anybody actually know how to spell this without looking at it on the screen? Yeah, I didn't think so. So, the intern in your team who was putting this title information into your metadata system didn't know how to spell it either and didn't look it up. Oops. So that information gets sent out incorrectly to your trading partner, major retailer. We won't name them. They're West Coast. So you send out your metadata, and the author name is incorrect. And at the same time, you also send out the metadata to a data aggregator or two, maybe Bowker, BookNet Canada. You give the data to a wholesaler, maybe Ingram, Baker & Taylor, whoever it is you use. And this data goes out into the field. Everybody's got this incorrect spelling. Now, the data aggregator and the wholesaler have delays in their system. There are delays before that's being brought into the retailer system. Sometimes that's because it's only distributed at a certain time. Sometimes it's because the retailer doesn't accept it at certain times. But whatever it is, there's a little bit of delay. So, meantime, your eagle-eyed metadata specialist, which is probably most of you in the room, right? You realize, oh my goodness, it's misspelled. I went and looked on Amazon's website, and it's misspelled. So you send an emergency feed. You call or email your contact. Hey, that's wrong. We're going to send you another feed. So you send another feed out. It gets corrected, right? So you forgot to think about the data aggregators and the wholesaler that got the information, though. And, of course, the pub date comes. And the night before the book is published, what happens? Of course, the data gets updated from somebody else that you forgot had the wrong spelling. Next morning, The metadata specialist wakes up and, like any good metadata specialist, goes and looks at the website. Oh my goodness, it's wrong. I'm going to send another emergency feed, right? So what happens next? Well, a few months later, that old distributor that you used to work with has the wrong information as well, and they send it out to the retailer, and it gets changed again. And so things change all the time. Now, most of the time, this last part is because of another retailer having a different price. How many of you run into the situation where the price of your book was changed because another retailer had it at a different price? And so retailer A decided, well, retailer B is selling it for lower, so we're going to do it. I've seen publishers where a used book was accidentally used as the variable, the standard for what the price of the new book was supposed to be selling for on a major retailer. So the major retailer saw the used book for sale for 99 cents and changed the print book price, the new book price, for 99 cents. It happens. So sometimes retailers will look at competitors and figure out what those prices are and put that discounted price on their website. Now, this is a real-world scenario, but things are actually not as simple as that either. The math on this actually can be very complicated. Data aggregators like Bowker and Baker and Taylor or BookNet Canada will adjust the metadata that you send them sometimes. Many times they will massage categories or change the information about authors to be more consistent, or maybe change the description of the book because the description that they have or that they even wrote is better than yours. They'll append new reviews that they come up with or that they find online. And they'll send that information out to retailers and libraries that accept their information. And retailers are bad about this too, because retailers will actually set importance levels on different fields of metadata. Retailers may say, you know, the publisher is really going to be important for the title and the author, but that book description, we're going to get that from Bowker. They'll set the priority order, and you may not be the priority. According to BISG's report on the development, use, and modification of book product metadata, only 36% of publishers go out and manually check their metadata on retailer websites. Only 36%. However, in the same survey, 95% of publishers say, yeah, somebody changes our metadata all the time. We don't know who it is, we don't know where it's coming from, but oh yeah, people are changing. Somebody's changing our metadata on retailer websites all the time. And those online retailers, again, they're ranking your knowledge of your own metadata. They're ranking you lower for certain things. So your goal is to become the master. Become the master of your metadata. Become the highest priority. And it's hard to do, but it is possible for you to become more of a priority to your retailers, more of a priority to your trading partners, that they know that you have the best metadata. First of all, you have to be consistent. If you are consistent in sending data and consistent in sending good metadata, then your retailers, your other trading partners will recognize that and start to actually understand that you can be trusted. In a lot of cases, publishers don't send good data. They send junk data. They send too much. They send more data than the retailer actually needs. If you're working with a children's book retailer and you're sending them your adult fiction, they don't care. They have to take time to filter that out somehow and only put up information for the books that they care about. So we've been working with retailers at Firebrand for a very long time. And retailers really have to consider what will help them sell your books. And they will only use the data that you send if they know it will help them sell your books. Because things can change and because you're not going to be the only source of data, in addition to actually being consistent, you have to actually inspect your data. Inspect it often. Now remember, BISG has found that only 36% of publishers manually inspect their metadata on a regular basis. So we've been testing this at Firebrand over the last 9 months or so. We actually started a system for testing how many elements are changing on metadata websites. And it's amazing when you start to see the little changes that happen and that blip by and you don't even notice. An author name will change for no reason. Publisher didn't send out a new metadata field, new metadata file, but all of a sudden the author's name is spelled differently, or the author's name is different in some other way, or somebody got added as an author. We've seen buy buttons completely disappear off of a website. Not because the book is out of print or unavailable, but just a technical glitch happened The buy button disappears. It's within the first month of the book being available for sale, and the buy button is gone for a day. And unless you're able to check that or able to see that, you're not going to know that your book's not going to sell because there's no buy button on the website. We've seen review counts that will spike. How many of you watch your review counts? Anybody go to Amazon and look at how many reviews you've got, or go to Goodreads and check out your reviews? How often do you do that? You're nodding your head back there. How often do you go out and do that? Every couple weeks? Okay, so 3 or 4 times from the time it goes from publication forward? So what if you were able to do that every single day? What if you knew you could go into a dashboard or something and see, wow, my review count spiked yesterday and I wasn't planning to go look at that review count until next week? Would that help you sell more books? Could you look at those reviews and determine, well, what kind of keywords can we use on this? Or what other information are we seeing? Or look at that Kindle review count and you see all of a sudden all the stars on Amazon's Kindle start tanking, and it's because your book wasn't designed well. Your ebook looks crappy. And everybody's giving you bad reviews because your formatting sucks. Could you go change that? Could that make a difference in your sales? Yeah, it can. So I've been talking about metadata from a pretty high level up until now. I'd like to give you some specific practical examples. Understanding how important metadata is and how you can manage it better is good, but I also want to help you walk away from here with some practical advice. So what I want to share are just some examples of best practices, but they're samples of the kinds of issues that you will probably run into and things you might see on retailer websites that confuse you or frustrate you, and hopefully they will help you understand those issues better. So these are examples. Your mileage may vary. I hope that they make sense. First of all, subject categories. Subject categories are a great place to start because we all know that subject categories will actually help retailers categorize your book, which will affect where your book sales happen to be. And of course, like everything else, most retailers have their own categorization systems. We all use BISAC here in North America. That doesn't really matter. BISAC itself is great, but at the same time, every retailer decides what that BISAC category transfers into in their own system. In some cases, it's actually close to BISAC. In other cases, it's all over the place. But it's important that you pick the right categories for your book. So here are some best practices to consider when choosing your book categories. First of all, if you need to include one, then just use one. If it's just one that fits your book, then use just the one. Don't put more in there just because you can. Second of all, otherwise, include more. Some say up to 3, some say up to 5. The point is, though, use as many as 5 book categories to describe your book. 3 is the common standard or the common recommendation. But again, if only one works, then use only one, right? If it's the right category, that's great. Just make sure that it's the right 5. Also make sure you're using the most up-to-date. This is maybe an obscure reference, I'm sorry. The new Power Rangers. Make sure you have the most up-to-date categories. How many of you are still using the old BISAC categories, not 2016? Yeah. Use the new ones. Join BISG and get them for a lower price or free or whatever, yeah. So BISG does update the metadata categories or the subject categories every year. So go ahead and update those, keep up to date, because those up-to-date numbers, as you saw in Noah's presentation this morning, up-to-date numbers don't just help you and help your publishers, they also help your retailers, they also will help the industry as a whole track things better. Don't use the general category, please don't use the general category. It doesn't help. Your book is not general, your book is specific. It talks about something specific. So be specific, dig into some, and if you can't, again, if you can't pick one specific category, pick a couple. That's okay. Also, don't pick a higher category level than the category you already have, so don't pick something that's further down the chain and then something that's also further up the chain. If you do history, dig down into history as far as you can. Don't also do history general at the same time. Don't mix and match your fiction and nonfiction categories. It doesn't work. Your book is either fiction or it's nonfiction. It's not both. Also, don't use adult categories for children's books or vice versa. Yes, your fiction book may be useful to adults. Your adult fans may love reading that book, but it is YA. Please use a YA category, right? Be specific. Don't go across the board. Let's look at series name. The series name information is an example of some metadata that sometimes gets misused or gets sent out incorrectly, or that retailers do differently depending on the retailer. So here on Amazon, this Polar Worlds book has the series name as Insiders in parentheses next to the title. Now this was sent out correctly by the publisher to Amazon in their ONIX feed. They didn't add it to the title in their ONIX feed, they put it correctly in the series field. And that's great. Of course, everybody's a little different. Books A Million doesn't have it in the same place. They have it down in the product information. So does Powell's, so does Barnes & Noble. And then some don't actually include the series name at all, which is really helpful. Can't find that book if I wanted to, unless I know the title. And unfortunately, there are some issues. So Barnes & Noble here, this Insider series is actually a link. And when you click on that link, it takes you to a search page where it shows you the other titles that are named with the same series name. However, Insiders seems to be a little bit common. And some of these might not be the children's books that you want your readers to be seeing necessarily. So after I created this sample slide a couple months ago, Simon & Schuster apparently went and fixed it. So now this isn't the way it works with theirs. They actually go to Barnes & Noble and click on it, it shows only the Simon & Schuster ones. What about authors and other contributors? So while you will provide the role of each contributor in your ONIX file, retailers won't necessarily do what you expect or what you want with that information. Some retailers will make a distinction between authors and illustrators and other contributors, and some won't. Some will just list them all as if they're authors. It really depends on who the retailer is and what their website is set up to do. So be careful about that. Don't add a bunch of contributors that don't actually make sense if it doesn't make sense to your consumers, or if you don't need to have that information. Author names can also be hard to get out right, and retailers will sometimes do weird things. In this case, in the ONIX file, we have a PhD added to the end of Teresa Ghilarducci's name. She has a degree reference because she has a PhD. That was added correctly in the ONIX file. It was sent out to Amazon. Amazon included it inside of their author name. Barnes & Noble and Indigo don't include that in their author name, though. So what happens when you click on Amazon's on the name in Amazon's website? You get a list of all the books by that author. Now, this author had only written one book for this publisher, but had written multiple other books for other publishers. Other publishers hadn't used the PhD. So on Amazon's website, you only see the PhD, right? You go to Barnes & Noble and click on the author name to do a little search, and you get all the other books. Now, this may be what the publisher intends. It may be okay. We don't want to publicize that she's got other books from other publishers. That's not going to work. But at the same time, maybe it's not. And if you're inconsistent in your metadata and what you're sending out, you could have this happen internally for books by the same author from your publishing house. So if you search for the author name with the suffix on it on Amazon, you do see all those other books. Something else to note about author names is the use of the author pages. How many of you use author pages on Amazon or encourage your authors to do so? Just a couple? So I recommend you do this. It's one of the greatest things. I hear self-published authors especially talking all the time about how important it is to have this page set up properly because that follow button is there. Do you know what that follow button does? That follow button lets an author write blog posts or notes to their readers and fans. They get lots of good marketing for free out of Amazon just because they're using these author pages. So you don't have control over this. Talk to your authors. Give them a good author bio that you've edited. Help them put it up there. Help them take control. And that follow button makes a huge difference to how your authors will engage. All the other metadata is important, of course, but keywords you assign to your book I think are actually more important. Keywords are the biggest and most important thing. At Firebrand, we've been running a research project over the last 9 months and looking at empirical evidence of how keywords will affect book sales. This research project tracked 80 different titles over 6 months. Each passed through a keyword analysis service from Kadaxis, which recommends keywords based on the reviews of the book. So we looked at book reviews and pulled out the actual keywords from those book reviews and from other sources. And those keywords then applied to the metadata. It was the only metadata change that was made to these books over the course of that 6 months. We just added keywords. The results of the study so far have been extremely impressive. All the publishers involved have seen changes in their book sales. Some of those publishers have seen dramatic changes. And I just want to tell you one example. So Dover Books is one of the publishers that works with Firebrand. They have a book called The Technical Manual and Dictionary of Classical Ballet. Now, this book was published in 1967. It has had low but steady sales for a very long time. It's a backlist title. It is definitely in the long tail. We ran this title through the keyword analysis and updated just the keywords. Dover saw an immediate jump in sales of this book. It is now ranked #1 in the ballet category on Amazon and ranked 17,000 in the books category on Amazon, just because we changed the keywords. That's it, nothing else. Dover initially just put 20 titles into the system for the test, but then they expanded that after seeing the results with this book. They expanded that to 1,000 titles. And over the course of the next 2 weeks, they saw drastic changes in the sales of those 1,000 titles. But 11 titles really stood out. Those 11 titles went up an average increase of 70% over the next 4 weeks. Those same 11 titles had been downtrending, had been going down in sales 11% over the last 7 weeks leading up to the change in metadata. Sudden change, right? What's really interesting, though, Dover looked a little deeper, and they said, wait, 3 of those titles weren't in the list. We didn't change the metadata for 3 of those titles. We changed it for 8 of those 11, but 3 of those 11 titles that suddenly got a 70% average increase in sales, 3 of them were just related titles. They got an increase in sales because of the keywords added to another book. So keywords actually have a massive impact on sales. And this is an example of what we call the virtuous cycle. In the virtuous cycle, it talks about how Amazon's algorithms will change and affect your book sales. If you get an increase in your page views, then you'll see an increase in your sales. And that changes what Amazon recommends, how often Amazon recommends your book to other people. And then that changes your keyword rankings and also impacts, again, your page views. The more page views, the more sales. You want people seeing your book more often. You can see the report at firebrandtech.com/keywords. It's for free. Download EPUB, PDF, or just read it there on the website. In conclusion, as we head off into that great unknown, I'll leave you with a couple of key points that I hope will make a difference to you. First of all, automate all the things. Automation is important in your job. It's not just about ebook creation. I was at ebook craft the last couple of days. I've been known for ebooks. Automation helps everything you do in publishing, and metadata as well. So don't try to do it manually. Don't do what that guy did with the Excel spreadsheet. A recent study of 25 publishers in the US and UK showed that 25% of publishers feel that they are lagging versus the rest of the industry in technology. Don't be in that 25%. Don't lag. Use automation to your benefit. Second, target your targets. The second thing is really to encourage you to create metadata that works for your trading partners. If necessary, send a specific ONIX file to each specific retailer, giving them specific information that works best for them. It's helpful. It actually helps retailers filter out the junk and pay attention to what they need. The descriptive copy you provide can also be edited and maintained specifically for markets. If you sell in the US and you're selling a Canadian book and you're using Canadian terminology, it won't make a difference to US retailers or to US consumers. So rewrite your book description and send your US retailers different descriptive copy that actually makes sense to them. It's helpful. Third thing you need to focus on is metadata quality. Your metadata is like a fine restaurant. Anybody ever gone to a really nice restaurant before? Did McDonald's feel the same after that? It makes a difference. So once you see the value of good quality, high quality metadata, you'll never really understand why people don't do it more often. Fourth, give your metadata more power. It needs to be supercharged with more information, with extra fields, with more data. More is better. And of course, you have to send the right data too. Duplicating junk in your ONIX file isn't helpful. Be smart about it. Fifth, you need to return to your metadata on a regular basis. To get the best sales, come back to it on a regular basis. Look at it in the real world, tweak it, change it. Your metadata is evergreen. If you take care of it, if you maintain it well, it will maintain itself for you. Any questions?
Is there automated notifications that you could have set up so that if something gets changed without you being aware of, you can get notified and it's like, wait a minute, all of a sudden my book went to 99 cents?
Not from the major retailers, no. Yeah, unfortunately, retailers don't necessarily care to tell you when your metadata changes. They just update the data when they get updates to it. So there's nothing you can do unless you do it on your own or work with someone who can do it for you. Yes?
You mentioned earlier that we should target, for example, the book description, if it's a US market. Is there a field in the metadata, a different tag that we can put that in?
So ONIX 3 has the ability to handle some of that, but unfortunately it's not supported across enough of the retail market. Most of especially the print book market is still using ONIX 2.1. Really the best way to do it is to create a separate ONIX file. So when you send your data, say, to Amazon US, give them an ONIX file that is specific to the US market. And when you send it to Amazon Canada, send it with that information. We work with publishers on this all the time. We work with a major publisher that's based in the UK and also has a major branch in Australia, and they publish co-editions and do a bunch of other stuff that requires that kind of specialized data. But it usually requires sending different ONIX feeds to different retailers. Yes?
Speaking of sending different stuff to Amazon Canada and Amazon US, we've had problems where we send it to Canada, the Amazon US will pull it, and vice versa.
Right.
How do we prevent that?
You just have to keep updating it, basically. You have to, and try to talk to your Amazon reps and tell them, hey, we're going to give you different data because we have different descriptions for this book for different marketplaces. There's not necessarily one way to do it. Every retailer is a little different about how they manage that data in different markets. But if you talk to your reps, hopefully they'll be able to help you with that. And Amazon's notoriously bad, notoriously hard to work with. But if you can keep updating the data on a regular basis, sending them the right data, keep an eye on it, that's probably the best way to do it.